Hello, I'm Charles, and I'm a beekeeper that loves old bee equipment. Today, I'm going to be giving a little bit of a crash course on feral bee capture and swarm boxes, or swarm chasing, as it is affectionately known. I've been a swarm chaser now for about 7 years. I love doing it. It's one of the most exciting parts of beekeeping for me. And here in central Maryland, we are heading into swarm season in about 2.5 weeks. The earliest swarm I've captured was on April 3rd in my region. Um, but usually I start seeing them or sometime between the 8th and up. And I would argue the most common time for swarms here in Maryland is May. May is definitely your month for swarms. So let's talk about feral bee capture and swarm boxes. The objectives of the objectives of this course are to discuss feral honeybees and the risks and rewards of getting them. We're going to discuss cutouts, which are slightly different. We're going to discuss different trapping methods. And as a disclaimer for this course, we're going to have a lot of anecdotal information. It's a culmination of best practices that I bumped into. Some things have great data behind them, and you can find in great books, such as Honeybee Democracy. But, there's a lot of anecdotal information in here, so take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Feral honeybees. Now, feral honeybees are any hive or any group of bees that is not tended to by humans. They are a domesticated animal, like all European honeybees, but when they're not cared for by humans, they're considered feral. Apis mellifera is domesticated, and there are no true wild honeybees in the Americas. And there are risks and rewards for more or less going after feral bees. Some of those risks are communicable disease, ambiguous sources, which is a real big deal for Africanized bees. I know that is a major concern in places like Florida and California, Texas, many of the states where it's a significant risk. It does happen here in Maryland, because occasionally you'll have something like a ship that comes into port that has a hive in it. Or you'll get packages that were sourced from the Carolinas or Georgia, where they have a little bit more of a risk. But it's not too common in many parts of the United States. But when you have an ambiguous source, you don't know where they came from. Pests they can bring along with them, especially varroa mites. You always have the risk of absconding, where, especially in that first day or two, if they decide they want to go, they will. And we'll talk about ways you can try to convince them to stay, but this could be all for naught if they abscond on you. Don't let it break you. Don't give up. Keep trying. Keep getting better at it, because there are things you can do to mitigate that. And then another big one is hazardous locations, and this isn't said enough. Some of these swarms are in toxic places, old buildings with asbestos. And the really hazardous ones that beekeepers bump into is when they're in high places, because they can choose to easily be 30 feet up off the ground. And the pro tip here is don't break your neck. I've tried to develop strategies to keep me off ladders as much as I can, like by using fishing nets and things like that. Excuse me, not fishing nets, but pool nets. That gets me up there about 20 feet if I need to. And I also will only use a step ladder now. It's an easy way to hurt yourself bad fooling around on a ladder. So keep that in mind, and ask yourself, is this worth the risk? Because no bees are worth breaking your neck over. For your rewards, they're freebies. And I say chicks dig free bees here. They do. They really do. A swarm could easily be $150 worth of bees. So it can be a significant money saver. On top of it, you're getting locally acclimated bees when you capture swarms. These are ones that have been in the climate for quite a bit, that probably have at least some tolerance to local variations of European foul brood or just local viruses and issues. So they are locally acclimated. They've proven that they can survive in your climate. On top of it, you have less chance of super seizure um, than you would with a package. Packages are generally set up for failure. They'll get these bees, they'll shake bees sometimes from multiple hives into a package. They'll give them a queen that isn't theirs. They'll put them all together in warehouses and trucks and expose them to both high stress and communicable disease. And take a bee that I'm sure is a great bee in Georgia or the Carolinas, and then bring them to other parts of the country where they might not be acclimated. Uh, and this part isn't an opinion. Packages are more likely to supersede. That means they're going to execute the queen, get rid of her. Swarms, that's a lot less likely. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's a lot less likely they're going to supersede on her and set the whole hive back. You get a faster turnaround time than a package. That's partly because the queen can immediately go to work, and that's if when you capture the swarm, you don't cage her, which some people do. But normally you get more bees than a package, depending on the size of the swarm. But I found typically you get a faster turnaround time. And you know, the joy of the hunt. I love going and hunting swarms. I love getting the calls and having my truck ready, and it's one of the happiest times of the year for me. And I'll get a call and have to be out there at the drop of a hat, and the thrill of the hunt and each swarm being its own challenge of how am I going to get to it and get them down and get them safe and then get them back to the garden. That is, man, I love it. I can't even tell you why. Now, swarms here, they all come in different sizes. You can have these large swarms like this massive one here in the center. You can have what is more likely one of the more mediocre guys like that's hanging on the branch right there. That's still a fair amount of bees and more than you'll find in a package. The one on the bench there. By the way, see the one in the bottom right corner where it's laying flat on the ground? I call those ground swarms. It can be indicative of the queen might be injured. It doesn't mean she is, but it might mean she's having some difficulty flying, and they've decided to cluster on the ground. It happens common enough. I used to hate those because scooping them is a pain without killing them. But I find if I do a little dab of lemongrass on the front of a hive box, you can march right in. Anywho, swarms come in different sizes. They can be found in different locations. And you can see by the pictures, like, the commonality is normally they're hanging on something most of the time. Because the ground variation is the less common, much less common. I found it that 90% of the time, anecdotally, they're hanging on a branch or something. And you see, they're not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have to be a branch. You see them hanging on a car right there. You'll see them on a fence. You'll see them a foot off the ground. You'll see them 10 feet off the ground. You'll see them 30 feet off the ground. They can come in so many different locations. And not all of them are easily accessible. So you got to kind of work with your situation. You may ask yourself, why would they set up there? Because it seemed like the thing to do at the time. They don't have much of a rhyme or reason, but they have shown that, you know, about 10 feet off the ground is an ideal place. That tends to be more common, at least, or that's at least for swarm traps. But there are factors of why they choose these places. Another one is if swarms have landed on that particular branch before, it still might smell like swarms, and it's more attractive to the bees. You'll also see a lot of situations where every year they land on the same area or around the same house, and part of that could be a selection bias, because there probably are factors around that house or around that area that make it attractive to honeybees. I'm sure that they can also smell themselves a year later or each season, but there's probably multiple factors that just make it attractive. But man, it can really be anywhere. They tend to like high up. Most of the time, I would say more times than not, I'm getting on a ladder of some sort, or I'm using the net to get up at them. On top of it, some have multiple queens, and you'd ask, why is that? It's often with cast swarms. With cast swarms, you'll have all of the queens emerge one day, and some of them decide to just depart with bees that have defected over to them. And that big cluster of them may have a few virgin queens in it. Once you catch them, they'll figure out who's going to be boss. But don't be surprised if you catch it and you find a queen and then you find another. It happens very commonly with cast swarms. There are also mated swarms versus virgin swarms, and you'll interchangeably hear virgin swarm called a cast swarm. The mated one is normally the larger of these swarms. That is when the mated queen will depart, and she'll bring about 40 to 60% of the hive with her. Cast swarms are typically small. They can be large, but typically they're smaller. And they will occur on the day that the queen cells open up, which is day 16 of the brood cycle. They'll cast off, and you'll have these sometimes itty bitty swarms or smaller versions of them. They can become successful hives, but remember, they got to go through becoming mated, and that's about 3 days of that queen resting, and then about 2 weeks of mating flights, usually in the main season. So it's already behind by like 2 weeks to where they won't even start making bees. And then after that, you have, what, 20 something days until the first worker. So you really got to think that hive is set back close to a month. It might be wise with those hives to move some brood over from another hive and set them up for success, and just keep them with a brood cycle to where they have enough bees to at least get some resources for themselves during that part of the season. But sorry, I'm going off on a tangent there. Preferably you want a mated swarm, but you're not going to choose. Swarms are going to kick off. And you know, what do you need to catch them? Well, you need a way to get to the bees. If it's high up and you have no way of getting to them, whether it's a long net or a ladder or something, you're just not going to get to them. You need to be able to get to the swarm. On top of it, you need something to put them in. And I'll talk about my preferences of what I put them in and what I have ready to go. But, you know, in a tight scenario, a cardboard box does work. A 5-gallon bucket does work. They are not ideal. But there's folks that, it happened at a job site where they work. They'll put them in there, keep them cool, bring them to their hive in the evening and shake them out. You can do that. I think you have a high abscond risk for it, but, you know, it's been done. And I remember one of my first swarms I caught, I had to put them in a cardboard box, and the guy that I gave them to literally cut a hole in the top of the cardboard box and set a hive box on it, and that way he could get them to go up and go live in the box above. Chuckling just thinking about it. You also just need patience. You know, you may give them a good shake and get them down, and the queen may still be up there and they're headed back up, or you may be in a frustrating position and want to be careless. Don't be careless. Be calculating and try to do it right. Don't put yourself in harm's way. I got to keep reminding people that don't let impatience ruin the experience for you and rush the whole thing. It's better you just do it right. And if it doesn't go well the first time, just keep trying. You're trying to coax tens of thousands of insects into a box a lot of the time. It takes a little bit of patience. And you know what really helps? Bait. And when I say bait, I'm meaning I'm primarily meaning lemongrass or swarm commander, but there are other things you can put in the box that make it attractive too that aren't bait. But, make it attractive. But we'll talk about those in a bit. Now, what is a cutout? A cutout is not a swarm. People will commonly call them that. Uh, and the term swarm is used so generically. Anytime people see a few bees around, oh, it's a swarm. It's one of the key things I want to tell people. When people call you about swarms, have them snap a picture of what they're seeing on their phone and send it to you. It might save you a drive, because a third to two-thirds of the calls I get are not honeybees. They'll point out to a bald-faced hornet hive on a building and go, oh, it's a swarm. I try to include great pictures with my ads out there. And some people get it, but the average person, the public, doesn't really know the difference. Cutouts themselves are established colonies that need to be removed. This means a swarm went in there and settled at some point, and they are a colony now. They play by very different rules than a swarm does. You have to literally go in there and cut out comb and move it over into a box. And, there's some things to consider in this process. The first is, should I even be doing this? Should you even be doing it? Maybe anytime you bump into honeybees living in a tree, do you need to take that tree down? Do you need to cut them out of it? Do you need to remove the feral hive that's in the wall? Like, if they're not harming anything and they're not a threat to humans or property or anything like that, I would just leave them be. Frankly, I would just leave them be. Oh, they're in an abandoned building that just sits over there all the time. I would just leave them be. They are not a significant nuisance. And other things you need to question is, can I get to them with minimal destruction? You can see in this case they had to cut open the side of a truck. The average person might not like that. On top of it, with masonry, there is significant pain. You have to destroy masonry to pull and do a true cutout. Otherwise, you have to do what's called a bee escape setup. But property owners don't like you cutting into their walls. And the thing I try to encourage a lot of them is, can the bees stay here? If they can't, then okay. Maybe we can cut this out. Maybe we can just take wall panels off with minimal destruction. That's a whole other class, and working with people for that. But some of this stuff takes a lot of destruction to get to it that may not make it worth it. On top of it, can I open this structure? My Sawzall, my reciprocal saw, I playfully call it the bee whisperer because it really upsets the bees. Most tools that you'll use to cut open a wall do. It's a very effective tool. In fact, that and a grinder, those are actually two of the best tools to be able to cut into a wall to help you out. I would argue with a log that's a chainsaw right there, but I get pretty well with my Sawzall. So can we open the structure, and is it going to cause minimal damage? You're going to make a big mess too, and that's not to be understated. I remember doing a cutout at a women's correctional facility in late August, and it was just full of honey. I mean, there were giant sheets of honey that I was pulling out, and out of 12 sheets, like 2 of them had a little bit of brood, the rest was just honey. And these sheets were, I swear, about the size of hubcaps for a car. It made a lot of mess, us cutting that out. The minute you start cutting open honey frames and they start bleeding honey, it's going to be a very messy procedure. Everything's going to get all sticky and nasty. And it's going to start attracting robbing bees from other colonies and wasps and other things. It's a messy ordeal. And that's to ignore all the sawdust or things you're going to be kicking up cutting into things. You might unintentionally kill the queen. It happens. Like you might be sawing into that wall and you get her. It's not unheard of. It is not unheard of. And you know what? The bees don't like it. I've never had a cutout where they enjoyed the procedure. Often I'll make sure I wear a suit for it. The smaller colonies take it better than the larger ones, and using a generous amount of smoke, the right amount of smoke, you can normally keep them pretty calm. But if you're doing a cutout during nectar dearth, they're going to be a lot touchier too. So remember, the bees aren't going to like it. Wear a really good suit when you do a cutout, and at least wear a veil. It's not worth your vision. It is not. On top of it, something that isn't quite mentioned here, it can probably piss the bees off for a good distance. Pardon my language, but we've had people get stung that came within 30 feet, or at least attacked, when we were doing cutouts. So, you know, in close quarter places in the suburbs or urban areas, you might want to think about what you're doing and what time of day you're doing it to reduce those issues. I would say also beware of foundationless frames. When you do a cutout, you're going to make a lot of foundationless frames, and they're going to attach those pretty well. But once they get filled with honey, they are very fragile, and you don't want to move them around and jerk them about. I often just rotate those frames out in time, simply because, you know, I don't like comb that's like been in trees and in feral environments. It oftentimes can be very nasty unless it's very new. And you just don't, like, especially in a building that might have had lead paint or stuff like that, I want to rotate that out. I'll just put it that way. You got to ask yourself, do I have the gear and the setup to do this? And I really do mean it. It is all in the prep. Do I have the boxes ready? Do I have the foundationless frames with rubber bands nice and ready? Do I have bait? I keep it right in the door of my truck, frankly. I always have a bottle of Swarm Commander or lemongrass there. Do I have a ladder? Do I have tools? Do I have a smoker? And I got a great video that you can see that I shot last year where I show my truck setup for swarm calls. I keep it that way pretty much from the last day of March up until about June 15th. On top of it, have your smoker ready and have smoker fuel. There's a lot of times I've arrived and I didn't even bring a lighter. And I had to come up with smoker fuel right there on the spot. You know that it's very unlike a swarm. A swarm is very docile and you don't want to use smoke, but with these guys you really do need it. I would also recommend watching some great cutouts on YouTube. JPB Man is one of my favorites that I've watched for years. There's just so many variations of how honeybees can settle somewhere. And you can learn a lot with how he comes at particular problems. I would watch a few of those and then give it a try yourself. On top of it, a cordless sawzall is a great tool to have. Remember cordless, because you'll end up in places where you can't reach with a plug-in. There's no outlet, or you'll go to places where there's no power. There are a lot of barns and sheds and things I've had to cut into where there just wasn't a power source, or getting a cord up there was incredibly painful. So bring a few batteries with it, but definitely go cordless if you can. Another thing that I don't mention here is there are great bee vacuums. You can sometimes even make your own. I'd be a little wary because I've seen some of the homemade ones kill bees. This year I'm going to be trying out a Colorado bee vac. But I'd only use them in certain situations. Especially, I want to avoid times where it's very messy and there's honey oozing out of things, because I don't want to accidentally drown the bees in it. Sorry to laugh, it's just I've seen that problem in late fall. But, you know, for a cutout, that's probably one of the best times to use a bee vac. The art of the swarm box. Let's say that you want the bees to come to you and you want to put some swarm boxes out and about. I playfully have the two simple rules on here of be attractive, don't be unattractive, because that's what you really want to do. Honeybee Democracy talks about really how bees collectively choose different sites to set up the hive and how they come to collective decisions on it. And they weigh a bunch of different factors that we're still figuring out from time to time. And you know, some of those factors are location. Location is a big factor. Um, they tend to like about 10 feet off the ground. They like it to be stable, like the wind shouldn't be able to shake the box at all, or it shouldn't be on a branch that's very rickety and bouncing up and down. And they do prefer sunnier places over shadier places. So if you can get something that is mostly sunny versus something partial shade versus full shade, that's ideal. And see the top one of get permission or be smart. You'll find people will hang these swarm boxes in parks and places that they don't necessarily have permission on property and land that isn't theirs. I would always just ask, because the worst thing they can tell you is no. And I like to do what they do below and, you know, put an email address or a phone number. And I even put a little sign that says what it is on it. This is a swarm box. And because I have them 10 feet off the ground, they're very unlikely to get vandalized. I haven't had one 10 feet off the ground get vandalized yet. I have had ones that have been on roofs get vandalized. But that's either here nor there. And the Be Smart one is, you know, if you're going to do something wrong, at least do it right. You might want to paint it in a more of a camouflage color and then hang it up in the woods and not advertise its presence. I would still recommend sharpieing maybe a phone number on the top of the box or the side. That way your box comes back to you. And you may say, okay, why would I want to do that? Well, I have been called numerous times to come pick up swarm traps people have taken down, and they didn't know what it was. They figured out it was something beekeeping, and the call chain got to me because I'm known as a local beekeeper. And I have at least like 6 or 7 deep boxes and medium boxes that were once swarm traps that people hung up, usually old boxes. Had they had numbers or something written on them, I would have returned them to their beekeeper. But I didn't have that option. And I get a lot of people just kind of abandon them as well. I've had situations where I've come out and dealt with other people's swarm traps that had bees in them, but the box had been hanging there for a few years. A lot of people use their old hive equipment and just leave them and forget them. Or you have a beekeeper that moved and didn't think to come get them. I know I've had to abandon a couple myself over the years. But that's enough about that. The other big factor for the art of a swarm box is space. You need enough space in that box to make it attractive. And you'll see on the right there, that is a nuke size box with 5 frames. That's too small. You want to go with at least a deep. That is not my opinion, but there's enough data out there to show that that's an established fact. The cavity needs it needs to be about the size of a deep or more to be attractive enough. Because if it's too small, they more often are going to pass on it. Then we move down to, you know, bees really love where bees have been. It's a solid rule. They're attractive to hives that died in walls or inside of trees. They love finding an old hive and moving in because they can go in there, clean up the comb, clean up the hive. All the pests that were in it at one time are long dead, and they can rehab that hive and make it their home. And if you can make it attractive, meaning, you know, use old hive boxes because they smell like bees, they smell very friendly to them. Use old comb. When I have frames that it's black, but the frame is still sturdy enough, and it's quite a few years old now. Those are the ones I'll stick inside of swarm traps. In fact, I often have it where, oh, I had a frame that broke. I'll mend it a little bit to where it can go inside of something, and that's the one I'll use because I don't want to use it in my own hives. And I'm so miserly with bee equipment and want to be able to save money that I try to reuse everything I can. Another thing that's important is swarm sites. Remember how I said before bees are attracted to where bees had been, and you have areas where bees are just attracted to? They could be attracted there for normal reasons, but if there's an area that, every other year or every year has a swarm touchdown in that area, I'd hang a trap near there. Put traps in areas like that you come to know. I know you have to be in swarm chasing for a while to figure that out. I often figure it out because there are communities I keep getting calls to every year because a swarm touches down there. The same neighborhood, the same 4 houses have it, the same trees. Last year, near BWI Airport, a family in Linthicum called me 6 times because swarms kept touching down. They had bees on that property there, and 2 of the swarms were theirs, but they were requeened, and they had queens on inspection, but other swarms kept touching down in that area because it smelled like bees and it seemed friendly. So try to find those places. Try to find them. And then, bait. Why does it work? Well, that's good old Nazinoff. Nazinoff is a pheromone that honeybees put out, and you'll see when they kind of do this twerking motion, it's the signal for, hey, come here. Over here, guys. It's a signaling pheromone that says, the queen is over here or we're gathering over here. A lot of the time I'll know the queen is in the box by the number of bees that are signaling. Because once the workers are like doing that twerking motion with their bottoms in the air and letting off Nazinoff, they're signaling for the others to come here. So Nazinoff is the key. But you know what really smells like Nazinoff and can trick them? Lemongrass is close enough. Now, I'm going to say some stuff that I don't know for a scientific fact, but it comes from Swarm Commander Marketing. They were saying something along the lines of that Nazinoff had 6 or 7 components, I can't remember which one, that make it, and lemongrass had 2 of those components. So that was Swarm Commander's way of saying they were a superior product. I do know that I did a test last year, and I sprayed a tiny bit of Swarm Commander on one of my peach tree saplings, and a swarm landed there about 40 days later. Never has landed on that tree before. I haven't tried it with lemongrass. I know Swarm Commander does effectively work, and it does get better catch results than lemongrass. But a lot of time, a big jar of lemongrass will do you fine enough, really. But because it smells like Nazinoff, that's why it works. And some of the other things that aren't quite bait are old hives, old frames, and old combs, because they smell like honeybees, and that makes them attractive. And you know what? Putting a little food in there doesn't hurt. A Boardman feeder you might stick in the back, and maybe even a little bit of honey. Depending on the time of year, you might see robbers. Like if I were to put food in it, I'd probably only put it in the months of April and May, and even early June here when the nectar flow is going on, because they really don't care about those feeders then. But remember, you can also attract some other things. You can attract wasps, yellow jackets, and some other unkempt individuals that may make it less attractive. I can say putting a few uncapped honey frames from hives that died in winter, and I just saved some of the honey and uncapped it and extracted it. Sometimes I'll put one of those in there, and those are a big hit. And as I said, lemongrass oil, a little dab will do you. I put a drop on 2 or 3 of the frames inside, and I always use 10 frame boxes. And then I put a couple drops at the entrance, and that's it. I've seen some people do something I think is real cool. You can even go out and buy a little pellet, these little pellets that are full of like Swarm Commander or lemongrass, and they're they're a slow release, and you can pop those and throw them in the hive. I've seen a lot of beekeepers take a Q-tip, dip it in lemongrass or Swarm Commander, dab those 3 frames and the 2 in the front, and then throw the Q-tip inside. I have also seen them take the Q-tip and slather it again, and then put it in a Ziploc bag that is almost closed. That way it makes a slow release. A lot of the time you're going to touch up that box, every other week. Just going to go up there and give it another little dab. And that just reminds me of a quote here. But I am not to be caught with such poor bait. I'm a big fish, I am. Using bait, it makes better results. You don't need it, but I would be hard pressed to try to do a hive without it. I wouldn't do it. And here are some really cool examples that people have done swarm traps for, which are pretty effective. You can see that the consistent theme in here is that they're not using 5-frame nukes. I really can't stress enough, and there's a reason I put all of them here. One of them is, in fact, excuse me, 2 of them, which are typical deep boxes. They're hung up there. They have the right amount of space in them, but they really gotta build. It's a little extra to get them to hang up there on a tree like that. You want to build a little stand. You want to build something that they're attached to, and then something that won't interfere with you getting the top on there. Personally, with my swarm traps, I screw the top on. My swarm trap is the one that's in the center there. Mine are typically a 7-frame box that I hang on, and then I screw the top onto it. You can also see right in the top in the middle, they have those things which you'll find in bee catalogs and at your local beekeeping supplies distributor. And they work, but I personally hate them, because here are my choices. If a swarm lands inside of that circular cavity, if I get them and shake them out immediately, they might abscond on me. They really don't like that. They really don't like being shaken into a box after they chose a place and settled. I feel that the abscond rate there goes up. 2, if I let them stay for a week and get established, they're going to start building comb. And sure, I might be able to move over some of their brood, but I now have to do a cutout for what was a swarm. It's much better to just have them move right into the hive equipment, frankly. You see in the bottom, that is where they have the cavity of a deep, and they do indeed have 10 frames in it, but it's done in a vertical way so it can lay flatter against the tree and it's easier to hang. I think that's pretty cool. And then you see one up on a roof. And in urban areas, that's great. You can put them on top of sheds and things like that, on top of connexes. If you have a high up place you can put them, put them up there. They work pretty effectively. Bend your environment to you. Just once again, golden rule, don't break your neck getting to them. Construction and transport fundamentals. And I'm going to point out the pictures here. Don't use nails. If you're going to use nails for some reason, use the more spiral nails, because those things bite in and they're not letting go. Use screws. And there are so many reasons I encourage people to use screws in putting together bee equipment in general, especially if you like repairing it now and then and maintaining it. I have some boxes that are as old as 60 years old. Sure, 30 years of that they spent in a barn, but like maintenance is key. And when you use screws, that's something undo. I can undo that. I can pull those screws out. Um, on top of it, they keep holding, and they hold better with a rotten box than a nail will, and they keep the boxes square and from deforming. So please use screws. Pretty please. But okay, on the main points here, are you going with frames inside, or are you focused on letting them go wild in your box? Which is the discussion we had on the previous slide with the round cavity. I've seen people modify 5-gallon buckets for swarm traps as well. It's just a consideration to make. Do you want them to do that? Because if you leave them alone for a week and don't check on that trap in a week and they're in there for 7 days, they can build a significant amount of comb quick. Are you ready to do a cutout? On top of it, can you attach and detach this thing safely on a ladder? Sure, you might be able to get up there on a ladder, but can you detach it from the tree or attach it on a ladder? That is a big concern, because if you can't get up there and detach it in a safe way, I wouldn't fool with it. I know I can get up there with my socket wrench, and this is where having a step ladder is superior, vastly superior. Because I can get up there and I'm stable and I can work, and God forbid you have somebody hold the ladder for you too. It's great doing a lot of these swarm chases with other people, and I think we'll talk about that in a minute too. And if we don't have it on the slides, I'll talk about at the end. But I want to talk about like the benefits of having somebody and what you can do. On top, is it level enough? One, you may want the swarm trap tilted slightly forward so it doesn't retain water, because if water leaks into the entrances and puddles inside, they're not going to like it. So that's a concern. You don't want it so on level that it's just unattractive. You want to be able to seal it, meaning that, okay, the bees are in there, and I want to close it up and take it home, because you're not going to leave that entrance open when you carry it down from the tree, especially at night, because at night, that's when bees are very, very stingy. So you need to be able to seal it, whether you have a hole and you put a plug over it. A lot of the time, because I just use regular deep boxes for it, I'll stick an entrance reducer in there at its lowest setting, and then like stick a piece of cloth in that little hole, and then just ratchet strap the box shut. And normally that works for me. If I have a trap up there, once again, my traps are screwed together, and I even have a little round disc on there I turn, which I can set it to closed. So just make sure that this thing's fully sealed, because you're carrying it down on a ladder, and it's full of stingy insects. You can see how that can go wrong for you. And always wear your suit when you're on a ladder with bees. Once again, there may be people saying, oh, I don't wear a suit. You're on a ladder with bees. Don't be dumb. I would always advise making the swarm trap in one piece, where you can just unratchet the arm and pull the whole thing down, because bringing it down in multiple pieces is not a good idea. Will this thing survive high enough winds? And I'm not saying it needs to survive a hurricane, but if you have just a regular thunderstorm that blows in and that thing's waving and flying about, it's not your ideal candidate, and they'll abscond out of it even if they settled in. On top of it, can bees overwinter in this thing? And that is a very serious concern, because there are plenty of people that hang out swarm traps and they'll come back for them next season, or they check on them during the main season and don't get anything, but a swarm comes in later. I like to have it to where if they overwintered in it, they would survive, meaning the trap isn't plastic or thin or cardboard the way that those round ones are hung up. If they go and settle in that thing, will they survive and not freeze to death? It's led to some great surprises in spring. I'm very happy about that, but you really got to ask yourself, well, can they overwinter in it? And if they can't, take the damn thing down. Otherwise it's just going to kill bees. Proper material. And what I really want to point out here is, beware of rotten wood and consider patching old hives before using them. A lot of the time, beekeepers will take their old deep boxes and an old cover, and they'll screw them on, and even screw the bottom onto it. Mainly because I don't trust hive staples, but they'll often do that. And with rotten wood, there might be other holes in the box, which isn't too big a deal. I have some that have had some rot in the walls, and I just used flex tape, or I just used duct tape to cover that hole on both sides during that time of the year when I was using it as a swarm trap. It works, but just careful of the integrity of some of those, because you don't want to be holding it by the lid, and all of a sudden, because the wood on the top is rotten, the screws all tear out, and then you just dropped angry bees on the ground. Ask me how I know. Then you got to ask yourself, how am I going to transport them? And that's very important, because are you going to put them in the back of a cab in a car? You better have it very secure if you do something like that. Are you going to put them in the back of a truck? Well, you might want to ratchet it down. That way it doesn't slide around in the back of the truck. And especially if you come to a real rough stop. So I try to even ratchet them down to the bed of the truck when I do my capture. And I also recommend grabbing them at night and being careful where you store them during transport. The transport part is more what I was talking about with the car and the truck bed and all that. I really try not to bring any bees into the bed where I'm driving. Don't bring them in there unless you have no other choice. And I also like to grab them at night. At night, everybody is home, and the next morning they wake up in a new location, and I feel that is more ideal. It really is more ideal, because you will have more of the swarm that comes with you, less losses, less stress. Just try it at night. Okay, when do I take them? Now, this can be a little more anecdotal and up for debate. And some of these are a double-edged sword. But here's some important things to know when you're looking and observing your boxes. If you see bees, it doesn't mean you have settlers. It doesn't mean that there's now a swarm that's settled in here. You should really observe it at dusk in the morning. If they're going in the box at dusk, they live there. Especially as nightfall is descending on them. And it's also good to look, okay, the sun is coming up, or bees leaving it. Okay, they live there. And a good thing to look during the day is, are they bringing pollen in? Like, do they have pollen on their pollen legs? Because if they do, that's a very good indication they live there as well. You may ask, well, I see multiple bees nosing around the hive and going in it and that. Well, they could be scouts. They could be scouts looking for the hive, and you don't want to rustle them up, because right now they're choosing if you're going to be their home or not. They also could be robbers. They are attracted to where honeybees have been, and they might be going in there looking for resources. They could also just be curious, because you'll see it yourself that if you have anything that smells like beeswax, they're really attracted to it. Like if you pull out your bee boxes, all of a sudden they'll be flying around it and looking at it and smelling it and landing on it. They can just be curious. I would always recommend letting them settle for 10 days. It makes them a lot less likely to abscond. Because the moment that they start laying brood, I think that's ideally your situation. On top of it, let's say a virgin swarm went in there. It gives a little bit more time for them to get mated before we seal it at night and move it, which is another reason to move it at night. Because if you close it during the day and they had a virgin queen that was out mating and then take it, yeah, she's dead. You just killed her and that was their only queen. So another reason. But I like to let them settle for 7 days to 10 days. It really lowers the chances of absconding to almost nothing. I would avoid midday. That's when they're out foraging. You may take like half the hive. And once again, if you have a queen out there that is mating, you may leave her behind and kill the hive that way. I would avoid letting them overwinter. Try to check on the boxes at most every 20 days. I know a lot of people will leave them up over winter. Then at least keep checking them until fall when there's just no bees that are going to come settle in there. I really wouldn't leave them. I would advise don't leave them up during those times. And a little bit of smoke will coerce bearding bees in. Bearding is when they go up to the entrance and, oh, one sec. Bearding is when they're just all around on the entrance, just pouring out of it. It's what happens when it's very hot. It's more or less them going out on the porch. If they're bearding and you want to pull this box down, but there's a lot of them on there, just give them some smoke, and you don't have to hit them hard with it. But keep giving them a little bit at a time, and most of them will just go into the hive, if not almost all of them. It's the best way to get them in. So that's with a swarm about the only time you use a smoker, but it only works because at that point they are an established colony, not really a swarm anymore. What are some great additional tools to bring? And I talk about these in another video, and I go more in depth about what I use in that and some of my tactics. So enjoy it for what it is. Feel free to make fun of my bad camera work. Yeah. But a good set of ratchet straps is priceless, and I truly mean that. There are many reasons why I have ratchet straps, usually about 10 or 12 of them in my bee yard. One is for hurricanes and storms that might blow through here in Maryland. But when I go out and I catch a swarm, I'll lay down the ratchet straps, set the hive on top of it, and at the end I'll ratchet strap the whole thing together after I seal the entrance, and I just carry it off. Ratchet straps are priceless, and then you can use more ratchet straps to ratchet it down into the truck bed so it's not flying all around. Having a drill can be useful. I screw my boxes, the lids on them for my hive traps, and I use the drill also to hang them with a bolt. I use a single bolt, a deep one, but a single one, to attach them to the tree. It makes the whole process faster and more efficient. Know this, though, that I often have a little rope tied to my drill, because the minute I'm done using it, I don't want to have to walk it all the way back down with the box just sitting on the top of the ladder, because it could easily tip. So I'll lower the drill to the ground, and occasionally I'll even lower the hive box to the ground. So rope is always a good friend to have too, and you'll see that on this list as well. A dolly can be very useful once you have the hive into something that you can move. I'll ratchet strap a hive to a dolly and move it that way if I'm going over a long distance. I've also had hives in forests without great vehicle access. And I'll tell a great story about that at the end. I promise. I won't forget. And why it was very helpful. Having good nylon or poly rope to lower things is very helpful, especially with your swarm traps and your tools. It's also very helpful when you're catching swarms because let's say you need to shake a branch, you can often throw the rope over the branch, tie it, and then tug it and get a good grip on it. That way you don't have to keep going up 20 feet on a ladder to shake that branch, or 10 feet on a ladder. Or get up there at all, because you can just throw it over. Rope has been very helpful. I can't overstress it. Like, have a little bit of nylon rope. A sturdy ladder and a friend to hold it. And a pro tip is to make friends. It makes life a lot less lonely, and it makes things a lot safer. And if you fell and you were hurt, have your phone on you. Tell people where you're going when you go swarm hunting. Let them send your wife or husband or partner or somebody the address, because it's just for your safety. Because a lot of time you're going and dealing with strangers, and accidents happen. You could have fallen on that ladder and hit your head. I mean, you need somebody to call 911 for you. A lot of the time when I respond to swarm calls, the people that called me are very interested in watching, and I always bring an extra suit with me. That way, if I can't get a friend to join me for it, and another friend that enjoys swarm hunting, that person can come up and observe and look at everything and wear the suit. And they'll sometimes hold the ladder for you and help you out. And this experience of these miraculous creatures landing in their yard, it can be very special for them too. And they could talk about how I put on the suit and help the person hold the ladder and got to look at it up close. It could be a magical moment for them. So I would always bring an extra suit or two, especially if like they're an old couple or there's a couple of them there. It'll never do you wrong. It's better to have it and not need it. And I gotta say, a good suit is priceless. I often drive around with my nice suit and my single piece suit, which is my cheap throwover that's like $10. That single piece and a good pair of boots and gloves are priceless. And you may say, oh, I don't wear gloves and swarms are pretty harmless. Yeah, they are. They tend to be very nice. They'll get angrier when you deal with a swarm trap because it's an established hive. But a lot of the time, the gloves aren't actually for the bees. A lot of the time, it's I need to reach into like a thorny rose bush to cut something and pull a branch out, or they're in a place that can be a little sharp. There's so many sharp bushes in the world. As to be how I know. The gloves are great to have on hand. And on top of it, when you're climbing up and down a ladder during one of these experiences, it's great to have them too, so anywhere you touch isn't going to get you stung in the hand as you're trying to move. A good pair of boots too is ideal, because one, they prevent you from getting stung in the ankles, but on some of the terrain and places you go, you want those boots. Especially in some of the old derelict buildings I've been inside. It's no fun. Broken glass and things everywhere. Protect your feet. Bees really don't like you cutting into their hives. You'd wonder why. They obviously don't like this. They don't like you moving the hives. They don't like you shaking them from the branches. They don't like loud tools or loud noises. They hate being transported, and they especially hate being bothered at night. So having a good suit is really ideal here. I'd say most of the time, swarms have been very kind to me. And even moving them at night, they've been pretty kind. But once again, do you really want to be in the dark, up on a ladder, dealing with stingy insects with no protection? That's just dumb. If you explain that to anybody out there, it's dumb. And we do these foolhardy things because a lot of time we want to rescue these bees and get them into a home and take care of them. But don't let it make you foolish. Well, it's story time, and I have a lot of great stories of doing swarm chases and cutouts, and it's one of my favorite parts of doing it because every one is a really cool, nutty experience. And I love that, and I love meeting the people that I bump into it from all walks of life, in rural areas and urban areas. And I get to educate about honeybees because everybody has a lot of the same questions. And I love doing it because it puts a great face on beekeeping and pollinators. And it's so different than when it was back in the 90s. when people were a lot more hostile to bees and a lot more hostile to our pollinators. Now they have really good buzz, and you'll even have people that are afraid of them but know how important they are and want you to help them. That's a really big PR change in frankly the last 30 years. But one story I'm going to tell is the Bolton Hill Park response. In Bolton Hill Park in Baltimore, they had a branch break off about 30 feet up in the air. It broke off because the branch at the elbow was very hollow. It was full of a giant honeybee hive. This thing broke off at 10 o'clock at night, and the city of Baltimore is going to go spray them, the parks people. They had the truck there to do it in the morning, and I got called by some folks that knew about our work at the garden and wanted us to come help. And I was sitting in a movie theater with my kids, and I was one of the rude people that answered their phone. I promised the ringer was off. And they said, hey, I got a swarm. And as they sent pictures, it was, no, this isn't a swarm, this is a cutout. And I knew that I had to take them out of the park there or they're dead in the morning. Because Baltimore wasn't going to play. They weren't going to leave an open honeybee hive right in the middle of a park. So I had to take them then. So I came down there. We cut up the tree with a chainsaw in 3 places. One which was most of the cavity of the hive with the brood, and then 2 logs which were just honey. They were just honey. I gave one of them to them after I got the bees out of it with a little bit of bee repellent. So I gave that to them as their reward. And I drove these things to the garden. I put them on the picnic table at Filbert Street Garden, and I came to deal with them the next day. And I did a cutout and got the bees to march after I got all of the comb cut out. I tried smoking the opposite end, and I finally got them just marching into the box. Unfortunately, their queen must have been killed in the fall because when I went through, they were already making queen cells. They did have some fresh brood, but I suspect that the combs slapped together when the tree branch fell, and she must have just been killed in it. But that hive is still thriving today, 3 years later. They are doing exceptionally well. 2018 was the forest hive, which I got some pictures and video of, which I wish I had included here. But that hive, a hunter called me in May of 2018 and said, hey, there's this hive that is sitting there in the middle of like a briar patch deep in the woods over in this particular area. It was over near Savage, Maryland, near a lot of the sites over there, like Annapolis Junction. And I took a look at Google Earth, and Google Maps, and going down the street, I could see on a hill where 4 or 5 years prior they had hives up there. You could see the top of the Langstroth boxes right there on the street view. And that person was long gone, and it looks like they left a hive behind because it was just surrounded by blackberries. And wouldn't you know it, even though it was half sunk into the ground and the entrance was just blocked by mud now, they had started moving into a rotten hole in the back of the top box because the hive was 2 deep boxes. So they found an alternate hive, and it looked like a swarm settled in. So my friend Andy and I, we went down there that night to go get it after I had scouted out during the day. And we went there in the pitch black, and it took us a little bit to find it again. And use the loppers, a great thing to have in your kit, by the way, for catching swarms, because you have to often cut branches off or cut around things. You'll find that in another video. But we cut it out, and we ratchet strapped it together. And I'm picking this thing up, and the bottom board is disintegrating, but still holding enough. And poor Andy, he wore yoga pants that night. And they popped him like 3 times within about 5 seconds. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm laughing so hard about it. We were wearing top parts of the suit, but they weren't wearing a good bottom. But I was able to pick the hive up and move it. And then when I explored it the next day and took it apart and moved the frames carefully, because they were some slightly rotten frames. The top box was fully occupied and full of honey and bees, and the bottom box was just full of mummified wax mothing crud that showed me the hive had died at some point, but this new swarm had moved in. But it was a really neat experience, and I got to keep the two deeps. I patched them and fixed them, and they're still in use. And that hive, I believe, lived for 2 seasons before having a varroa issue. And I have many of their descendants to this day, but their progeny still does live. A third story I'll tell is a cutout that we did over at the Maryland's Women's Correctional Facility in Jessup. They have a bee club there, which is an excellent club, and they keep hives, produce honey. Great folks over there. I feel comfortable saying that. But I know it's a very important pastime to them there. And they're doing a great thing that pollinates a 2-mile radius around the facility. And I've given some of my time there. They had a hive that settled inside of a hollow space above a doorway. And we used the Sawzall. They did let me bring it into the prison after heavy inspection. I was able to open the wall, and there were sheets of honey. It was about a dozen big sheets, and it's the most honey I've ever pulled out of a feral hive in my life. We just threw the big pieces into a garbage bag of honey. That way they could mash it up inside, and then like put a small hole in it and hang it, and just let it drip into something. They had to find very clever ways to filter it there. But I was able to get like 3 sheets out of there that were the brood, and I pull it out, and the queen is right there. And it was an amazing experience because I got to show the women in that club, and it was a very rewarding experience on a very hot day. I'm not sure I would ever cut one open in late August again. It's just so much honey. But it was a very healthy hive. But it's a very fond memory because I know over at that prison years later, and I think that was 2017 I did that cutout. They're still talking about that 5 years later. I know that was a very special memory for them. Well, this is my question slide, which is typically the final slide where people ask me questions when I give this class in person. I've gotten to go to a few clubs here in Central Maryland. I have a high passion for swarms and catching them. And if you want to read somebody that really their journey appealed to me, is AI Root. You'll find that Amos Root, he first got into beekeeping because of a swarm that landed in his window at the jewelry shop that he owned in Medina, Ohio. It landed there, and he had an assistant that knew a little bit about beekeeping help him catch it, and they moved it into a box, and it absconded on him, unfortunately, but he just became obsessed with bees. And he ended up building the AI Root Company, which is still in business today and is a great candle company. And they still publish Bee Culture, which used to be known as Gleanings in Bee Culture. Wow, about 140, 50 years later, it's still in publication by that company. And like I feel his journey. And there's a number of people that have gotten into beekeeping that I've bumped into over the years that were so excited by the experience of a swarm touching down that it generated their interest in bees, or they had thought about beekeeping and saw it before. One of my key inspirations for beekeeping was a neighbor I had growing up, Mr. Sass. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. but he kept bees behind the church that he managed. And he kept 5 or 6 hives, and I was too much of a coward as a kid to go over and just ask him about it. Because it looks so interesting. And I really wish I had. But sometimes with a swarm touching down, they kind of chose you. And people feel real special that the bees felt comfortable enough to land on their property or on their rose bush or on their tree, and that they found that to be a safe place. And they want to try to protect them and help them move on and get rehomed somewhere that they can live and survive. So I would encourage you, when you go out and do these captures, please be very courteous to those you bump into. Ask permission before you cut a branch. Ask permission definitely before you go on anyone's property. Because a neighbor will call you for bees that landed on the adjacent property. Better have best etiquette because you represent all beekeepers. And you have the opportunity to be a very special person that showed up and gave them a memorable experience. And if you bring that extra suit and maybe even a little jar of honey, because I keep these little 8-ounce jars that I use for swarm calls that I give people. It makes them call me again next season. And when you're kind and memorable, once again, honeybees go where honeybees have been before. You'll get calls from the same people year in and year out when they spot swarms that land in those places. So be that memorable person. Be be courteous. Answer their questions. Tell them about bees. I know they're going to ask the same questions time and time again. But once again, it's the duty of beekeepers to educate about beekeeping. You may not feel that way, but it is better for your bees to live in a world where people understand them a little bit better and how important they are. So it is an altruism that affects all bees, including yours. And on top, I never met a beekeeper that didn't like talking about their bees. So take it as an opportunity to do that. All right, well, that's all I got tonight. And I appreciate you listening to this hour and 12 minutes of me yammering and making bad jokes. And I hope you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you have any great pro tips that you love, any videos that you love of captures or stuff that went really well or even really bad, go ahead and put that in there. Talk about your favorite swarm encounter, your favorite cutout, or some of the challenges that you had. Because they're exciting stories, and I know I love hearing them. But please please subscribe, and I wish you guys a wonderful 2022 beekeeping season, especially you guys in regions that are already chasing swarms and enjoying it. I am envious. You have a good night.